Boom. All right, greetings everyone. Welcome to Terra Prime Live on our new weekly spot. Tonight we are going to be talking about some practice issues and how to get the most out of practice. I am Darth Anonymous, coming to you here from TPLA headquarters. Joining me tonight, we have our friend Dr. Miracle, Jared Miracle. How you doing? And our local apprentice, Desso Faulkner. How's it going? All right.
Oh, wow.
Very good. Okay, so yes, what we are talking about tonight is, as I said, making the most of your practice. So we've all been cooped up here for quite some time, most of us. I know there's some places, different people have different levels of access to certain things. Where I am, we've been we've been kind of sequestered for about a year now. So let's just say we're calling for that good old breastplate stretcher. So as we're all getting back into it, there's some things that we should probably look at as we are moving back into scenarios where we can play with other people, to have two-person stuff going on, whether it be drills, sparring, competitions, all of that kind of thing. So we will talk about those kinds of things. We probably the best, I don't know, there's a couple of different ways we can discuss this, because there are people out there in different situations. For instance, let's say you're one of our students who are just following the material. You're in exile. You don't have anybody around you. You're probably not going to have anybody around you in any foreseeable future or whatever. So there's that. And kind of what your goals are there. Then you have the people who are waiting to get back together with their groups. There are people who've had some access to groups, but maybe have been, distancing, that kind of thing. So there's some particular issues that are probably going to come up for the bulk of people. I would say probably right now, and you guys can chime in here. Probably the first one is probably fitness. Whether or not you've had any access to anything, or have had stuff to do, because, for instance, my routine has been extremely truncated without the two-person component. So that's a lot of work in a day that just kind of evaporates. So how we can start putting that back in, what we can expect from there. I don't know, Dessa, what you are in Florida, so how has it been with you guys?
As far as like getting the group back together or anything, we're still playing that by ear. We have a lot of our group that are getting their vaccinations. They're going to be vaccinated soon, so that's going to be very near in the future. Us getting back together in spaced locations, so that's looking pretty good. We're thinking maybe mid-June for everybody to get their final thing in their 2 weeks in, and getting everybody back together to get started.
Sure. And what have you been kind of noticing has been slipping or missing the most since this?
For me personally, I get hugely motivated by helping others and showing others how to do. The teacher's dilemma. This is how I learned. This is what I learned. This is what I want to show you. And without that, the motivation, I think, is the big issue to deal with, without having partners and stuff.
Motivation is definitely a big one. So yeah. Jared, do you have any thoughts on the issue? We've, as a fellow lifer.
So, since moving to the town where I live now, I've primarily just trained on my own. Um, both TPLA and other more traditional martial arts, largely due to lack of local interest. So I'm out there looking like a goofball in my city park every weekend, and I'm sure that at some point someone will take interest in swinging a lightsaber at me. But in the meantime, uh, I often feel like uh, Clubber Lang from Rocky 3. I train alone. I live alone. I fight alone. Um, but the key thing to keep in mind whenever you're in that position, because this is a long and proud tradition in all forms of martial art, finding ways to progress while you're by yourself, and then be able to jump in without losing a step when you do find a training partner. I think you're absolutely right that conditioning is key. So it's like we say in the zombie apocalypse, rule number one is cardio.
Yeah.
So you do have to maintain a base level of fitness, even if that means having to do the boring stuff, maybe go for a jog or finding means of doing cardio with your saber. But maintaining your basic physical capabilities, I think, is job number one. And then job number two is Dulon, Dulon, Dulon.
Yeah. And the thing too is Dulon hits a lot of those things. So you can use Dulon as a very good way to gauge, where you are. Like, how do you go through this? Now, as far as bringing up your conditioning outside of just doing saber, right? So like fitness stuff, body weight exercises are excellent. So push-ups, body weight squats. Try to do them in front of a wall to make sure that your form's good before. And I mean, facing a wall. We've got some videos on that, which I'll try to throw up around our social media things. But so these things which hit core muscles very, very heavily. And then large joint mobility. So your hips and your shoulders, these are the joints that are going to lose mobility the quickest when you're sedentary or when you kind of come out of your particular routine. They're also probably the two joints that you really want to focus on movement there, because the risk of overuse injury or that kind of thing is pretty great in both of those points. So so push-ups, body weight exercises, obviously walking, running, doing that. Specifically for this kind of stuff, sprinting. A lot of people just kind of go out and they like jog. Jog will give you a certain level of cardio and will bring you up. But one thing that will really help martial arts is sprinting. So picking if you have a field nearby or something like that, or just picking a stretch of road or something like that that's maybe 100 meters long or something like that, and then just sprinting that length as quickly as you can, at 99 to 100% of your effort. You get to the point and you cool down by walking back, and then you do it again. That's probably the simplest little periodization for building up burst cardio, because that's really what we're talking about. If you go to some of the blog posts I've done recently, I talk about that burst cardio, because that's what you kind of need in a fight, in any type of fight, whether it be competitive, whether it be real, whatever, is you need the ability to go full on, right, for a certain period of time, then be able to recover very quickly so that you can do it again, right? So that's so when you're working on cardio, sprinting is a really good way to do it. Some people find it, I find it a little bit more fun and interesting, because it's not just like going to the store, going to the store, going to the store. It's boom, 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 and definitely a lot of work. So
And related to that is the tried and true classic from all forms of combat sport training, the interval.
yeah,
So you can download free apps if you have any kind of smartphone that will set an interval for anywhere from, you can do 10 seconds up to 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then arrange for yourself a variety of physical challenges that you will then cycle through. So if you have 5 different exercises like a sprint, a squat, a push up, um, maybe a solid minute of cycling through swinging as hard as you can, things that will work the muscles you're going to need in whatever your specific event is, and then go through as many cycles of that as is necessary. That's a great way to maintain that burst fitness.
yeah, yep, yeah. So any of those movements, so personally for me, I like keeping the movements of my practice separate from the movements of my fitness. So when I'm doing my fitness, I do really, really like push-ups and squats, like very fundamental things. One tool that I use, I recommend this all the time, is the kettlebell. Um, Building strength, building endurance, building this type of cardio. This is a great tool. So if you have access to one, if you can buy one, they sell them everywhere now. When I got this, it was kind of hard to get them, but they are, we used to call them the Russian home gym. They're just, you can get one, put it in the corner. It doesn't take hardly up any space, fits in closets, fits wherever you want it. So um, that's a tool if you're going to get into that type of thing, that I recommend. Doing the dumbbells thing, weighting the wrists, I'm of dubious. I don't know how effective that stuff is. Right.
There is very limited evidence based on randomized trials.
Right. Yeah. It's hit or miss, and we don't know whether or not it's just the training modality or if it's the weights. So, but what we do know is that if you increase things like your hip hinge, like your shoulder mobility, and you keep that stuff good and that base of movement, you then can build skill pretty much anywhere you want to go. Right. So that's good. That's a good thing to think of. When you're doing any of this stuff, one thing you want to be careful of, especially as you're getting back into it, is overuse injury. So if you're doing push-ups and squats, start with low reps, right? Make sure that every single one of your reps is perfect, right? So if you're doing squats, you're either using the wall to keep yourself, in line and in the pocket, or you are, whatever it is you're doing, make sure that each rep, no matter how many you do or how few you do, is perfect, right? Because that's going to give you the most out of that. You do that for a while, you can build up the strength to do that. But you want to be very, very careful of not overdoing it right away in search of cardio benefits. One thing that's very easy to do is to do stuff to exhaustion. That, as long as you can do whatever it is to exhaustion where you're not going to put any of your body at risk, it's okay. But like if you were to do like a throwing motion and you were to do this to build up cardio, a very, very, you would have to modify it a little bit. You would not do it as hard as you can. You would try to do it as perfect, because if you did it as hard as you can, that's what's going to start that cycle of injury, inflammation, discomfort, compensation, further injury, and then on and on and on and on we go, right? So we want to stay away from that kind of thing, of total repetitive stuff. Now, so yes, so that would be that. Any final thoughts on the fitness aspect of it?
I think what we really are getting at, like the takeaway for it, is we always in the fitness industry, right? We're always talking about the SAID principle, specific adaptation to impose demand. And I think that too often people are injured because they look at the imposed demand and forget about the specific adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
And general rule of thumb has it that your joints and your tendons and ligaments will recover at about half the speed that your muscles will. And so people will go hardcore with a muscle, doing cardio for the first time, and then end up with tendonitis or something because overuse injury. So as long as you remember that recovery is 50% of what you're doing, then it's pretty hard to hurt yourself doing that. But you're absolutely right that you need to pay attention to the specific thing that you're doing to avoid hurting yourself.
Right. Yeah. So that's where that goes on. When we talk about kind of like functional fitness, one of the things that I try to impart is, rather than, because what the fad of functional fitness kind of got out there, and it started to take the permutation of do everything on an unstable surface.
That's exactly what I was about to say.
And that's not what it means at all, right?
Just do it on a stability ball. That'll fix it.
Right, exactly. So doing stuff on an unstable surface is part of functional fitness. And what that is if I am, well, I'll give you an example. I used a Bosu ball, which is like a half inflatable ball, right? And I would do this to help people's squat and ankle flexion. Now, when you're on the ball, your feet can do this freely, right? So when you squat, the tendency is to go forward, and the Bosu does not allow you, or does not stop you from doing that. So what we would do is we'd have them stand there and put a tennis ball in the middle and say, do squat without letting that fall off or roll off, right? So they had to actually actively keep their ankles flat, right? And moving. Because one of the problems that a lot of people have with their squat is they just kind of drop down and they don't have any kinesthetic awareness of their ankle, so they can't really move it and all of that. And that was a really good way to kind of bring people back into the squat. But once they get their squat on that ball, you bring them down to the ground, because the number one thing about functional fitness is how our body actually in real life uses force and produces it to create work in our environment. You are not standing on a inflatable surface all the time. If you worked in a bounce house factory or something, testing bounce houses, maybe that will have some sort of effect for you, right? But I see all these people, like hockey players on these balls. It's like, okay, so at the beginning, sure, it's fine, right? It'll help your ankle, mobility and stuff like that. But at some point, you have to get down onto the ground, because what your feet are really going to use to keep you up is firmness, right? The firmness of the ground. So you want to be able to feel that, right? So it's always the thing. So yeah, when you do functional fitness, it should be a realistic movement. Quite frankly, manual labor is the best functional fitness there is, right? And you see a lot of these places that are charging tons and tons of money for people to bang things with sledgehammers. Meanwhile, road workers are like, what? So that's the thing. If you're doing work, if you're shoveling and stuff like that, if you pay attention to these universal principles of movement that we teach you in martial art, keeping your shoulder down, making sure your spine is straight, right? You're not bending from the spine or anything like that. You keep those things all in check. You have a lot of leeway to do what you want to do. Okay. So the next thing, as Jared said, Dulon, Dulon, Dulon. Right. Oh, did you have something to add, Dessa? Nope. Okay. So yes. So forms, kata, Dulon, as we call them. How do we so like doing them, just going through them has tons and tons of benefits, and that's why we're saying there. Obviously, since we're talking about cardio and we're talking about that, it has a cardio benefit. It's burst cardio. Most forms are about the length of an exchange or a match or something like that. They contain periods of a lot of effort and some recovery periods and all of this kind of stuff. And so they have a lot of stuff. Plus, you're doing movements which are biomechanically similar to what you're going to be doing in your competition or fight. So you're conditioning your body in that specific way, as we said. And so yeah, so those are that's kind of the basic thing. Now, there are other things. I'll start off here with one of them that I always try to impart, which is doing a set form. Something that you have to learn is always going to be more productive for you in the skill and technique area than doing free form ever will be, meaning just kind of like improving movements. All right. Whereas like the improv of movements can be used as, kind of like a warm up or something like that. It shouldn't be at the core of your practice, right? A set form is going to have in it combinations of movements which are counterintuitive, right? So they're not going to be stuff that's going to occur to you naturally as you're just going through things, right? And they're going to be containing particular biomechanics that you're going to want to string together to use in high percentage techniques. They're usually planned out a little bit. And since they're foreign to you, you have to internalize them, right? Whereas with freeform, you're externalizing internal stuff. When we want to change stuff, we kind of have to take things in. We kind of have to take on some stimulus. So freeform's very, very popular out with lightsaber people because just taking this out and swinging it around is fun, right? And demonstrating with free form and all that kind of thing, perfectly great, right? It's like I said, it has limited uses as far as what you're going to learn, whereas Dulon will have specific lessons that it's teaching at different levels of experience, right? So if you've been doing a Dulon for a certain amount of time, you're going to learn something different. You're going to get something different out of it than you did when you were first learning it. So there's layers in there. A lot of people, I think, minimize the importance of that. But so that would be my offering. Anybody else want to jump in on that one?
I completely agree. It's no different from memorizing poetry versus trying to drop free verse. It's
Right.
nice. We can be creative. We have our sort of go-to patterns, but at the end of the day, you're cognitively probably going to get more benefit out of trying to force some tenazin into your head and then spending hours contemplating it, figuring out the depths of it. Why are these high percentage maneuvers? Why do I have to move my foot in this goofy way that doesn't feel normal?
Right. Yep.
I agree with all of that. As somebody, still performing the Dulon, I want to say almost daily, and having really begun to understand what I feel some of those lessons that you mentioned are. I do have a question in regard to that for you personally, Nan. Do you, when practicing, perform the Dulon, say same, your relative same speed every time, because you say it's for a burst cardio and it's to simulate a combat with an opponent. Or depending on what your focus is for your exercise that day, you change speed or possibly even like footwork, placement, posture, that kind of, or is it always the same every time?
Well, no, it's not going to be the same every time. And especially when you're learning something like that, you know, a form is very complicated. So there are footwork elements to it. There are, you know, body elements to it, weapon elements to it, if it's a weapon form. There's eye gaze, there's breathing, rhythm. There's a whole slew of things that you, as you learn the form, you put into place. The breathing is a very good example of that. I often kind of talk about forms as being breathing exercises, right? Because by trying to move through these movements at a certain pace and for a certain amount of time, you need to have your breathing set, because if you don't, it will not work. You have to have enough inhaling and exhaling. You have to have a good oxygen mixture and all of that kind of stuff. And, you know, forms have very large bodies of traditional methods in which to do that. Now, they're obviously intuitive methods, right? They came up with them through trial and error, right? So if you want to alter any of these things using modern ideas, that's perfectly okay, you know. You don't have to stick. I know there's lots of 108 this and certain numbers of this and stuff like that. That's all cultural window dressing, right? The important things are the breathing rhythm and being able to think about it, right? Doing it consciously.
Now, Master Anonymous, we do have a couple of questions here in the chat whenever you have a moment to.
Excellent. Let's see what we got.
I can read them off if you like, or I don't know what your setup is.
Yeah. Let's do it.
So this is from user, I'm going to go with Papa Sims CS. I apologize if that's wrong. With the manual labor exercises, what are your thoughts on balance, as in not favoring one side?
So it's perfectly okay to, like, say, a sledgehammer. I'll just use one of these things as my sledgehammer, right? So your sledgehammer thing, right? You're coming over here. Do you switch sides, right? If you do, it will, obviously you'll have a more even workout. But there is a phenomenon in the body where any contraction you make on one side of your body, there's about an 80% contraction on the other side, So, and this is so that you do not become completely out of balance, right? Because we all have a dominant side. And it's also, if you want another, I don't know if anybody can hear that, but there are a lot of people screaming outside. Let me see if I have a.
Seems appropriate for a Sith lair.
Yes, right. Anyway, I'll just do it. So if you take firearms training, you never put your finger on the trigger until the moment you're going to shoot. And the reason is because of that phenomenon. Many a police officer back in the day holding their hand on the trigger or somebody like that reaches down for their handcuffs, grips their handcuffs to pull them off, and their trigger finger, which is doing the same thing as the other finger, just goes doot, and boom, gun goes off. So that's one of those things. If you take, and if you want to really see this is fun. You take something that you can squeeze like really hard, stand in front of the mirror, have one hand empty, and then just squeeze as hard as you can with the other hand. You'll watch your other hand do this. Right. So do you have to balance them? Not necessarily. When you're doing more of the bilateral stuff, that should keep you in line and all of that. Would I recommend it? Sure. It's always good to get a little bit of expertise on one side and the other, and to keep both sides kind of neuromuscularly healthy. That would be my answer.
I fully agree. Any exercise that we're using for foundation is going to be a total body exercise anyway. And so unless you're doing something like, I don't know, a bicep curl with the express intent of hypertrophying your bicep, anything else you do is going to balance out anyway. And it's not as if you move in everyday life, with complete and perfect symmetrical balance. You're going to favor one side or the other anyway.
Yep. Yeah, it's always going to happen. And so that's where it is. And it's funny because a lot of times people and a massage therapist told me this. They were surprised that my right hand was stronger than my left hand, and I was right-handed. And I'm like, why? Well, most people basically use their left hand to hold things and their right hand to do fine motor movements. So like they'll hold their bag or their groceries in one hand while they unlock the door, right? Since obviously weapon work, you're using your dominant hand most of the time. It's reversed. And now, of course, these are differences of very, very small amounts. It's not it's not like one can do this and another one can't. It's just, tiny little differences in grip strength and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Now we also have another question from the same user about forms, if you don't mind.
Sure.
With forms, do you recommend performing the movements smoothly or aggressively, as if against an opponent, or both?
Well, saying both does sort of assume that there's only two kinds. So, doing it smoothly and, all of that is one thing. Doing it slowly and smoothly is doing it another thing. So when the first martial art that I got my formal instruction in was Tai Chi Chuan. And my teacher was fairly old, and so he learned very, very old type of style before a lot of the standardization of today. And we had 3 ways of doing the form. And they had 2 different kind of qualities, right? We would say short but long, long but short, long and long, short and short, right? So you have long movements, you have short movements, you have long energy, you have short energy, right? Now, I think usually they call this, there's different Chinese terms for it. But basically it's like this. So if we take a particular movement, we'll just do this one here. So this is what we would call long but short. So short movements, I'm not going to full extension, right? And long energy, meaning it's an unbroken chain of energy, right? It's flowing. Now I can do it long and or short but long. And this is where it gets a little confusing in English, where I would go like that. So the same movement, but it's chopped up, right? Now I can do them very, very long movements where it would be here, out, and you're using long movements, low stances, extreme extension, right? And then we have a tight form where we actually hold our body tight, right? And go through the movements in very, very small motions. That's probably the most realistic, what they call realistic motion for doing that kind of stuff. But that's something that you need specific instruction in. Doing the forms in different ways is definitely a very good thing to do. I don't know, Jared, do you have any other types of ways to do forms? I mean, I know there's tons of ways that you can do it, right? Different speeds and all that thing.
I as with all physical training, I have to go back to the SAID principle. What is the outcome that you want, and then tailor your training specifically to that. If you're planning for, so Taiji Chuan, for example, I don't know how well this is now distributed among the general public, but it's largely understood that most of the forms are intended more for like grappling scenarios,
Yeah.
and to train wrestling, which requires a different type of muscle fiber and a different type of coordination entirely than percussive fighting. So a boxer would not be well served to train in Tai Chi Chuan. You would have to completely change training modality. And I think the same thing is true here. If you're planning to go into sabering competition and you're going to need these immediate quick bursts with very few long movements, as you said, it would not necessarily behoove you to train in that way. But if you're looking to understand your body mechanics or to increase your general flexibility, then you're going to want longer movements and you're going to want to move more slowly. You might add more force in particular vectors. You mentioned ankle and wrist weights earlier. Those are maybe not the safest thing to use, but there are ways to introduce resistance to your training if that's
Sure.
something you need to be doing. So it entirely depends on the outcome you want.
Yeah. Well, a good resistance is that we use a lot is heavy weapons, right? You do your form with a little bit of a heavier weapon, not too heavy. Don't go crazy. 6-pound cold steel pig choppers, whatever, that kind of thing. Because it is, we've talked about this too. It's a myth that real swords are enormously heavy, right?
Counterproductive.
Yes, yeah. Labor saving device. Remember that. Labor saving device.
But the use of iron weapons, for instance, in training is well established because it makes you better at swinging the light version.
Right. Now, here's an interesting thing. There was a study done a few years back with baseball players. And because what they do is they take the bat and they put a bunch of weights on it right before they go up to bat and they do a couple of swings, right? So they wanted to see how long does that effect last. And if you're doing that, right, the actual increase in force production that your body will do only lasts for about 15 minutes, right? The reason you would train with a heavier weapon, in my opinion, is because it helps you maneuver around that weight, right? A sword is weighted in a particular way. The heavier it is, the better you can feel it, right? A lot of people love trying to get that balance point right at the hilt because they saw it on Lord of the Rings or something like that, and the fact of the matter is most swords are balanced somewhere in here, right? Things that are choppers are probably balanced way out here, right? Again, labor saving device. I want to be able to just let go, and let that thing just kind of go by itself. The extreme example is like in an art like Bagua, we have a very, very large saber. And contrary to popular belief, it is not so that we can fight with a saber that big. Because
something in Bagua that's not what it appears?
Right. It's basically just like a regular saber made really big, right? So it's weird in that way. But what it does do is it gives you this very large, heavy object by which that you have to use your whole body to maneuver it around in this particular way, use its momentum, because you can't just do this with it. It will tear your arm off. Because I mean, I don't know how, do you have a Bagua?
I don't know.
No.
I mean, I've trained with them before, so I know how miserable it is. But
Yeah, so mine weighs about, I think it weighs about 4.5, 5 pounds, right? Straight up and down, right? So when you hold it out like that, oh, oh boy, I don't know what the calculation is, but it's, whoo, boy, does it feel heavy. So anyway, that's the kind of thing that I like from heavy weapons, is you get to feel that, that feeling, but yeah, absolutely. If you're training for competition, what should you look at? What should you be concentrating on in your Dulon, right? Because a Dulon is not a 1-to-1 ratio or 1-to-1 replication of a fight, right? You're not going to necessarily move like that. So what are you thinking about? If we take the easiest form to go between, Makashi, which is kind of set up for that, what are you looking for when you're doing the Makashi Dulon? And one of the things is discerning your center line, right? And making sure that you know where your center line is, that you can change it, right? You can change it, but you can always simply attack on it, right? So each trajectory in there challenges that ability a little bit in a different way, right? Because it's very easy for people to say, right? People always say, "Oh yeah, you have to keep your weapon on your center line," right? That's very, very easy for people to say. But the thing is, if you're going up against somebody who knows a little bit about what they're doing, right? The first thing they're going to try to make you do is take your saber off the line, right? And we've got many, many tricks in which to do that, right? So we have to keep that in mind. So when we are thinking, when people are watching the Dulon, they're like, "Oh, well, that's not realistic. That's not important. I don't have to worry about that because that's not something that will happen," right? If I do something where I'm here like this and going here like this, what is all of this stuff doing, right? What exactly am I, that? And it's so that you can take your weapon off of your line, bring it back on, that just discerning where your center line is doesn't mean just staying there. It means being able to wander off of it and snap right back, right? How far can you turn before you can't turn around again, right? So that would be, that's one example of what to kind of concentrate on in that manner. Any thoughts?
A lot of this actually comes back to what I mentioned earlier. Doing the Dulon, the long but short, the short but long. All of that kind of encompasses what I was talking about. Taking the Dulons and performing them at different speeds, at different lengths. So I appreciate you definitely going over all of that. Now, specifically Makashi that you bring up, what's what is an example of the individual lessons per trajectory that you're referencing?
That's not each. When I say that, right, there are specific lessons, but it's not like they're going to be, there for you, right? Each thing gets a little bit more complicated. Each thing's going to have a particular type of body motion, right? If you're going here like this, right, what are you doing, right? If we're making that if we're making this motion here, right, if we're going here like this, what's the difference between when we tail, like if you're watching us and you're following us, or you're on the forums or anything like that, and you see us giving feedback, we'll say, well, you have to do this or that. What exactly are we looking at when we're saying somebody is or is not doing this well, correctly, or whatever? What is it? And so the difference could be, right, first of all, I am not moving my arm. Okay, so if I do not move my waist, all I'm doing is this, right? I'm moving my waist, and that's what's moving my saber, right? So that's a lesson, right? How do I parry, right? Because like I said, we're going to be, if you're going up against me, my number one goal is to get that saber off of your line so I can get at you, right? And what am I going to do? I'm going to try to get you to move your saber off, right? I'm going to assume you're going to try to do the same thing to me, right? So what am I going to do? I'm not going to swat at things, right? Because if I miss, now I'm in trouble, right? But what I do is I turn at the waist, I turn at the hips, right? I move the entire apparatus. And there, when we say economy of motion, that's what we're talking about. Economy of motion is whole body motion, right? It's not moving like a chess piece at all times, right? Or moving as little as you can, right? It's getting as much done with as little effort as you can, right? That's the important part. That's also the problem if you're trying to lose weight with martial arts, because so much of it is, don't waste your energy, and losing weight means waste your energy. So it's hard to get there, but we will. Actually, I got something to announce at the end. Me and Vornak are going to try to get going, a little video series, but I'll get into that later. Yes. So, anything to add on that particular thing?
No, I think that was well stated.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so what do we have? Any more comments here or questions?
So I guess the question of the take home message then is, let's give viewers something highly actionable to take away.
Good idea.
End of the day, you are a single individual, don't have a training group. Maybe 4 to 8 times a year you have the chance to train with other people. What is a typical solo training session going to look like for you? Say you have 60 minutes.
For me personally,
sure,
I usually work on my sets. So I will usually, like I said, I usually, keep technique and fitness separate. So like I will do a technique portion, right, where I go through my sets, right, or whatever it is I'm working on at the time. I will take out some movements here or there and drill them for perfection and all that kind of thing. If I'm doing it really religiously, like I've set this time aside and I'm going there, I will usually go between. I'll do some of my sets, and then I'll go do my strength, which usually is deadlifts, kettlebell, Turkish get-ups, that kind of thing, and then do another about half hour at the end, which is not an hour. So it's an hour and a half, but any hoot. Yeah. So that's what I would usually do. I usually start with my technique, and then I would get into my fitness. If I did them on the same day, right? and if I did them together, if I had to. Oftentimes I will do one and then I will do another at a separate time. How about you?
If I have an hour a day for training, so I usually, as with you, I separate technique and fitness generally. And further, I'm very dedicated to my cardio for a variety of reasons. So I usually will cycle in the morning for 20 to 30 miles most days, which can take, 50 to 70 minutes depending on how bad a day I'm having. And and then my weights are in the evening, which usually takes give or take an hour depending on what day it is. And then somewhere in the middle of the day, I will stop and do about 30 minutes of technique only drilling. But if I had 60 minutes a day, I would probably start with a reasonably gentle warm up that will, you need to be moving and get your core temperature up. Otherwise, you're pretty much guaranteed injury. Then I would move into whatever my primary cardio focus is going to be. If I'm say planning a circuit training like we discussed earlier, then I would have that for the bulk of the time, so maybe up to 30 minutes. And then I would transition from that into strength work, which would be maybe the second largest portion, and then probably conclude with about 20 minutes of just straight technique, give or take.
Yeah.
I think on a 60-minute program, that's probably the direction I'd go. Currently, probably about 30 minutes first, not first thing in the morning, but shortly after getting up in the morning. Varied body weight exercises, push-ups, lunges, squats, jump squats, that kind of thing. Just to kind of get going, since none of us really like running. But take that a little bit in the morning, and then a little bit later in the afternoon, go anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour. That's kind of what we are, throughout the week. And then, of course, our training days on Sundays, we go anywhere from 1.5 to 4 hours just working whatever technique we're really trying to focus on for the week. And then we will practice that throughout the week for our technique section.
Yeah. I'll also have to say that I'm probably not the greatest person to look at either, because so much of and I've learned this now, like so much of my work was done in class. And when I had those classes disappear, it's like, that's a lot of chunk of time where, and, in my classes, you only work on basics. So that's where I work on my basics, all that kind of stuff. So it's been tough. But yeah. So yeah, that's what I would recommend. I am of the school of thought for a lot of things, because I've grown up around athletics, and I have my family runs a fitness club and everything like that. So I see a lot of mistakes and stuff like that. When we talk about warm up, I would advise keeping these warm ups, under 5 minutes, right? If you're doing anything longer than 5 minutes, you're no longer warming up, right? You're working out. I often, though, will, like, depending on depending what you're doing, the different warm-ups can, be, more or less, effective, but don't overdo it. I see a lot of people warm up for like 15 minutes, and it's like, no, no, you're not warming up anymore.
I see a lot of value in having a less formal transition. So the first 5 minutes may be very like gentle, slow, trying to get your shoulder working. If you like me wake up and your shoulder doesn't lift properly.
Right.
And then by the end of that 5 to 10 minutes, you're in cardio mode.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then
So
by the end of cardio time, you're doing strength. It's just sort of a gradual transition.
I'm much more of that person. I don't have a separate warm-up routine. I start off at a certain intensity level and then I work up from that point. But one of my favorite teachers of the fitness thing, Gray Cook, brought up warming up, in his thing with the functional movement screen, and he said, warm up isn't necessarily necessary. If you're a caveman and a saber-toothed tiger jumps out from the bushes, right? And you don't get up and, oh, I gotta stretch out my hamstrings here and then run. You just run. The reason we get injured is because we have lost so much of our daily activity, right? We sit, we drive, we do all this stuff, and this, like we are talking about today, like quarantine has done, weakens you a little bit. It makes you a little bit more vulnerable to injury. That's really what this entire thing has been about. As you are easing yourself back into things, remember that there's other factors going on besides just what people talk about with fitness advice and stuff like that. Judge your own feeling that day. If you're not feeling 100%, don't do an intense workout, right? If you're going to get your second shot for your vaccine, do not work out. I guarantee you will regret it the next day.
Drink water, eat bananas.
Yeah.
That was a bad weekend.
Yeah. So that's a very, very important thing to put out. A lot of people thought that they would, oh yeah, I'm going to work out and then I'll feel a little bit better. And they were destroyed the next day. But anyway, so your feelings, you feel differently from different things. You have different things during the day. So really just be careful, judge your own body, get into it, work on the stuff that you have, focus on basics, keep things simple, easy at first, work into everything, ease into it. Don't just jump into it and all of that. And especially if you're planning to get together with people pretty soon, start this right away, all that. Now, real quick before we go, I'll let you know, I am planning on doing something with Vornok, Matt, where we will put out a few videos where we'll be breaking quarantine. We know we have a long road ahead of us. We were sparring yesterday and it was very apparent. So we're going to allow you to kind of come along with us on a journey of getting back into shape in that way. So stay tuned for that. I'll be letting you know about that. Anyway.
Exciting.
Yes. So anyway, thank you, gentlemen, Jared and Deso. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the program tonight. Let's see. Yep. And thank you, Papa. Yes, I don't know, Papa Sim.
I'm going with Papa Sims CS. That's what I've said.
Yeah. So thank you for your questions there. He asked real quick at the end, are you a fan of mental and visualization thing? Different topic. We'll talk about that.
Keep your antennas tuned for Tarakasi.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yes, we'll talk all about that. So anyway, thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you, guests, and patience, practice, perseverance. Happy sabering. All right.